Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my Best Books of the Year awards to give out. I have a couple of end-of-the-year videos talking about the best books, the best authors, the best characters, all that type of stuff. Today I'm going to talk about the best books within different genres and subgenres that I'm going to discuss. So I'll discuss how many books I read, which books I consider like my runners-up, and then which books were my best. My winners in each category. And it was very hard to narrow down some of these categories. Sometimes it was easy. Overall, it was pretty hard. I will say that I am not going to pull out every single book in a genre that I read and hold up the book to show you. Instead, when I talk about the genre, I will have a big graphic that has a picture of all the covers of the books that I read. And then I'll pull out, talking about my runners-up and winners, I'll pull out the actual book and show you. So, let's go ahead with my first genre. My first genre is fantasy. For fantasy, I read 18 fantasy novels this year. And as a whole, it was a lot of fun. There are a few duds in there. But overall, I loved what I read this year. I read a lot less fantasy than I thought I did, and I need to reprioritize it next year because it was so much fun getting to read it. So this is my list here. You can see the full list of all the fantasy novels I read. Some good, some bad, some amazing. And I have 5 total books to talk about here. 4 runners-up and 1 winner. So my first runner-up is Gods and Dragons by Kevin J. Anderson, the third and final book in the Wake of the Dragon series. This is not an impressive series in that it does anything groundbreaking. Everything in this series has been done. But the thing that makes Kevin's books so nice is that they're satisfying. You feel you've taken the journey with him, with these characters in this world, and you feel like it's paid off properly. The ending in this book is big, it's epic, it's exactly what you'd want from this book in this series. And also, the character conclusions are all great. If you like Kevin's writing style where you have so many big, large amounts of characters, they're pretty black and white, but you have a lot of characters, and then they're interweaving their stories back and forth, and then they all come to a head in this big, epic, climactic moment, then this is a book for you. So that's my first runner-up in the fantasy genre. My second runner-up in the fantasy genre is a recent read, and that is The Lost Metal by Brandon Sanderson. I loved reading this book. Had a ton of payoff. It was the final book in the Wax and Wayne series, and it was such a sweet book to read for certain characters that are involved, and I don't want to spoil what that was. And also, this was just one of those books that was a joy to buy because it has so much extra value than other books I've read. This book sets up a lot of things in the Cosmere for the future. So this was an excellent second runner-up. My third runner-up is a self-published book. This is Netherworld by Ari Ryder. Netherworld is a fantastic little standalone novel, really short but lots of fun to read, set in this world where people are, when they die, they go to this kind of in-between world between heaven and hell and earth, and they have the opportunity to come back to Earth if they pass 3 quests. And our main character has to pass these 3 quests in order to save his sister, who is being pursued by an evil gentleman. He's not a gentleman, he's an evil dude. And this book is just delightful, handles all classic and modern tropes that it needs to handle. My fourth and final runner-up in the fantasy genre is Death Masks by Jim Butcher, and I just realized 3 of the 4 books in my runners-up were all from November, so these were great books that I read in November. Death Masks is the 5th Dresden Files book. It did everything you'd want a Dresden Files book to have. It has Michael Carpenter and his family come back. It does everything you want a Dresden Files novel to do, and it really reinvigorated my excitement for the Dresden Files. Now for my winner, my favorite fantasy book that I read in the year 2022. I will probably get flack for this because this is A, an unknown novel, and B, the people that do know about it generally give it bad ratings, but I loved it. I didn't love the sequel that much, but the first book I thought was superb, and that was Rhapsody by Elizabeth Hayden. Rhapsody just told the exact right story I wanted, an epic sweeping story, but still had a small cast of characters, had a lot of influence from the Wheel of Time, but also went in new directions, and it dealt with really deep, dark themes that many other books don't delve into. So it's a really excellent classic fantasy book. So that is my fantasy genre best of the year. Now I'm going to get into my science fiction best of the year. I read 13 science fiction novels this year, 7 of them from one series. So it overall came from one series, The Saga of the Seven Sons. But I read other science fiction books. Again, some good, some not so good, some amazing. And I have 3 books total, 2 runners-up and 1 winner. And I'll talk about the runners-up together because they're from the same series. I have Of Fire and Night and The Ashes of Worlds. These are books 5 and 7 in the 7-book Saga of the Seven Sons series. What makes these 2 books so good is these are both like climax books. This one really wraps up the storyline up until this point, and then it sets up something else, and then this book pays it off 2 books later. And both of these books, again, Kevin is a master at wrapping everything up that he needs to wrap up, and he does just a superb job with these 2 books. Really, with all the books, he did a pretty good job. But these 2 books in particular, this was when the series hit its stride, was in these 2 books. So these are my runners-up in the science fiction genre. But my favorite novel in the science fiction genre came from another science fiction author that you'll probably recognize, and that is Timothy Zahn's Manta's Gift. This was a wonderful, wonderful book. I had such a blast reading this book from cover to cover. This is one of those few books that I was hesitant going in. I was afraid I was going to dislike it. And man, was it worth it. It's basically Avatar, but with manta rays instead of blue people. That's really is the pitch of this book, even though this book came out first before Avatar. You know what you did, Cameron. But this book was just the character development, the plot, the pacing, the world building. It was a very different novel for Timothy Zahn, and yet I'm so glad to write an entire book from the alien species point of view is a bold choice, and it paid off. And it solidified Timothy Zahn as one of my favorite science fiction authors, and this is probably one of, if not my favorite, science fiction novel of all time. It's truly a masterpiece. Next, we're getting into my next genre is my mystery and legal thriller genre. I put them together because neither one really works well by itself, but also I don't want to lump them in other categories, as I'll talk about in a second, so I lumped them together. So I read 8 legal thriller and mystery books this year. I read 4 John Grisham legal thrillers, and then I read 4, it's 9 total. It's 4 John Grisham legal thrillers, 4 Agatha Christie mysteries, and then 1 mystery that's not Agatha Christie. And so I have 3 runners-up and 1 winner. This was a category that was hard because I really liked everything that I read of these books. I almost entirely loved everything I read in this genre. This is the genre that's newest to me. Well, one of the 2 genres that's newest to me, and I am all in for it. The mystery genre and the legal thriller genre, I cannot wait to read more. My first love is fantasy, and I have to read more fantasy. And I love science fiction and media tie-in fiction, but man, is legal thriller and mysteries really exciting me. So let's get into my runners-up. My first runner-up is actually a book I don't have my copy of because I borrowed it from a friend. And so that is And Then There Were None. I have a review on the channel. Brilliant book. If you've read anything Agatha Christie, if you know anything Agatha Christie, you've probably heard of this book. It's the book that's also a play. It's her best-selling book. It's always one of her top-rated books. This is not my favorite Agatha Christie, but man, was it well done. The way that she lays out the mystery, executes it, and then reveals it to the audience is just superb. Beautiful. My second runner-up is another kind of indie self-pub type book, and that is Murder at the Harvey House by Ari Ryder. You'll notice she also wrote the fantasy, one of the book Netherworld, and she also wrote this mystery, this Beatrice Adams mystery that was just delightful. Oh my goodness, was this a delightful book. I love Ari's writing style. Her kind of wholesomeness that she has in her books is just superb. And this book, the mystery is not the strength of this book. The strength of this book is the setting. It is like a 1920s, 1930s book set in like just outside of like California, and so you're seeing like kind of the early stages of Hollywood, and you're seeing the waning days of flappers, and all the terminology and vocabulary used by the characters just sets you back in that time, and it's just a delightful, sweet book to read, and so that's why this is one of my runners-up. My final runner-up in my mystery legal thriller category is A Time to Kill. I know, most people, based off what they saw on my list, would put this as their number one. This was such a good book. It was the first John Grisham book I read. It blew me away, the way he deals with dark themes like racism and the death penalty, and the way we treat other people in society, and the justice system is just superb. And I was so scared to read this book, and I only read it because a friend of mine said, I told him, I'll read whatever you read, I just want you to read, and this is what he picked. And I was like, well, darn it, now I have to read that too. So it is a not delightful, that's the wrong word. It is a impressive book. It is horrifying at times, but it is worth it. And it really made me, I was impressed by John Grisham's ability. But we have to get to my winner in that category, and the winner in the legal, thriller, and mystery category is Sycamore Row by John Grisham. Boy, I was surprised by this book because I was already all in with A Time to Kill. And when I bought this book at the same time I bought A Time to Kill, and I was like, all right, time to read it. And I had just come off the high. I had literally just finished reading Manta's Gift. And so I'd already read one of my favorite books of the year. And I thought, well, this has to be up there. And I was amazed that this book met how good the other books were. And really, it's my favorite of the John Grisham books because of the way he deals with the financial stuff in this book and also the morals in this book. But really, all three of the Jake Brigance novels, A Time to Kill, A Time for Mercy, and Sycamore Row, could have been on my favorites list, but I had to narrow it down a little bit. But this book, it is amazing. Time to get into my next category is my horror and thriller category. And I read 7 books in this category. And some of the books, there were some okays, there were some greats, and there were some amazings. I'm going to hone in on the 2 amazings in this category, one runner-up and one winner. Both of these are by the same author, and so you'll probably figure out what they were. But I'm enjoying getting into this genre. This is not a genre I'm ready to jump, all the way in on. Jump feet first. I'm not ready to just dive in or anything. That's head first. I'm not ready to dive in on the horror genre yet. But these books that I've been reading, these horror thriller novels, are reeling me in a little bit. And so the runner-up is I Don't Want to Kill You by Dan Wells. Dan, I met him a couple times. I interviewed him once. He was just the nicest gentleman when I met him. The first time I met him, he talked with me for almost 45 minutes at the convention in North Carolina, and he did not have to. He did not have to, but he did. And he took the time, and he was nice. And he made a fan out of me. And I read his books, Mr. Monster, I'm Not a Serial Killer, and Mr. Monster. I loved both of them, particularly Mr. Monster. I loved it. And I was like, last year. And I was like, okay, I gotta read some more. And I Don't Want to Kill You was amazing. And it did a good job wrapping up the trilogy. The way I feel about Dan Wells is the way a lot of people feel about Stephen King. I don't like his endings. But I thought that this book was actually still really well done. And he really got me to empathize with his characters, particularly John Wayne Cleaver. So this book was superb. But the winner of my horror thriller category goes to the most messed up book on the category, Extreme Makeover. One review that I saw said, "Dan, what is wrong with your head?" And I was like, I totally agree. That's the sentiment after reading this book. This is a book, by the way, very poor cover in my opinion, but this is a book that is, it is amazing to read. And I'm kind of scared that I liked it so much. This is a book about this makeup company is trying to make this new face cream, and it ends up, they think it's going to like make people look younger. Instead, it actually ends up cloning people. And it causes all these huge genetic problems in society, and it leads to an apocalypse. It's horrifying. It's just, ugh. But it's so well done. And I was hooked from beginning to end. It's masterfully paced. It's got the just right amount of characters. The ending is a bit, again, I don't like Dan Wells' endings, and this is another example of me not liking his endings, but it's still really well done. So, Extreme Makeover. Oh, I still get creeped out thinking about it, but it was very well done. Now we're getting into my media tie-in fiction categories. And my first media tie-in fiction category that I'll talk about is Star Trek. This, I read a lot of Star Trek novels. This is my biggest category. I read 22 Star Trek novels. And I gotta say, this was not the most entertaining year of Star Trek reading for me. In 2021, I read banger after banger after banger for Star Trek. And at the end, it started with the end of 2020 when I read the Destiny trilogy, and then I read the Fall, and then I went and reread Prey, and I was just so energized about reading Star Trek. And this year, I read 22 Star Trek novels, which is a lot, and I just didn't feel that energy continue. And by the way, last year we ended with the amazing Coda trilogy, which wrapped up the whole post-Nemesis timeline. And ever since then, I'm reading older books, which is fine, but some of them have been amazing. But as a whole, I've just felt this sense of disappointment with them. And the only reason I've really kept up my reading of Star Trek books is because I want to get through all of them, which there's a lot to get through, but also because I write book reviews for Oku Depot. But I'm going to be looking into other books I could write as book reviews because Star Trek is not cutting it for me as much. But there is, every once in a while, you get to Star Trek book that just makes you feel amazing, and that is just an amazing book. And so let's get into that. I have the first runner-up is Before Dishonor by Peter David. This is the big action book that I thought Destiny would be. And this is also the big Borg book, Borg story that First Contact should have been. First Contact is a well-done movie, and it's entertaining, but it should have been so much better. It should have been so much bigger. It should have been so much more epic. You know, the problem with the Star Trek movies is because the budget was so small, they felt like longer episodes. Instead, they should have felt like big, epic, cinematic experiences. And First Contact is the most cinematic of the Star Trek movies, but if they had done this instead, oh my, this is just a beautiful book. The way it deals with Janeway in 7 of 9, the way it deals with Picard and all of his storyline, the way it deals with all the crew of the Enterprise, the way it deals with Earth, the way you see everyone on Earth get freaked out, the battles, the whole climax. It's just so visual and vibrant and brilliant. And it was a delightful read. And it's the first Peter David novel that really got me excited. So I see why people like him. He's still not a favorite for me yet. I have more books of his to read, but this was really good. My second runner-up is From History's Shadow by Dayton Ward. This was a surprise because usually Dayton Ward gets between a 3-star and a 4-star out of 5. Normally, he writes good books, but he never writes anything amazing. He doesn't have the oomph or the themes or the character development that John Jackson Miller or David Mack or James Swallow have, or even Una McCormick. He never has that in his books. But From History's Shadow does have all of that. This is an excellent example of media tie-in fiction. It went up It was in a tough category. It went up for the Scribe Award, and it lost to John Jackson Miller's Kenobi. And that is a tough category to be in. No novel was going to beat John Jackson Miller that year. And for good reason. That's the best media tie-in fiction novel ever. It's kind of like how my favorite musical, Bright Star, went up against Hamilton. It's like for the Tonys. No musical was going to beat Hamilton that year, regardless of how good it was. And that's how this book is. It's an amazing novel. It just came out at the wrong time. It is a TOS novel with time travel, with aliens and Earth, and it's kind of got that kind of 40s and 50s vibe of post-war or America being worried about the Soviets, and they're not really dealing with Soviets, they're dealing with aliens. Oh, it's just a delightful, hilarious book, and it's just such a fun read. So I highly recommend From History's Shadow. But my winner Star Trek book of the year is one of the first books I read this year, and that is Articles of the Federation by Keith R.A. DeCandido. It is amazing that this book exists. It is not a good book to market to people because it is basically the West Wing in Star Trek. I don't think there's that much crossover, and even if there was, there's not that many book people who are willing to pick it up. But this is one of the best Star Trek novels ever, one of the best media tie-in fiction books ever, and a brilliant political novel. It really feels like, I cannot stress this enough, it feels like a West Wing story set in Star Trek. The characters have this West Wingian dialogue and language, and the plots are obviously taken from different West Wing episodes. And the way that they infuse Star Trek elements, it still feels like a good Star Trek story. And so this book, I grinned ear to ear reading it. It was a longer Star Trek story, but it was so worth it. So that was my winner in the Star Trek category. Now we're getting into the final category I will talk about is Star Wars. I read 14 Star Wars novels between adult, young adult, and middle grade. And I have 3 books to talk about, 2 runners-up and 1 winner. Star Wars is always a tough category because I have high standards, because Star Wars is my first real love in reading. Fantasy is my current, that's my genre, that's my thing, and I will love it forever. But Star Wars is also it's what got me into reading. And so I have high standards for it, and I enjoyed a lot of the books I read this year for Star Wars, but I was actually most critical this year of Star Wars. Star Wars had the most poorly rated books, partially because the quality wasn't that good, but also because I have really high expectations. But I do have 3 books that were phenomenal, top-tier Star Wars books for me. And the first is my favorite Star Wars middle grade novel, at least in the canon, and that is Mission to Disaster by Justina Ireland. I was really demoralized when this book came out because I did not like the YA Star Wars High Republic novels, and I really didn't care for the middle grade. I thought they were all too all over the place. I thought that they were all just not pushing the themes that I was interested in Star Wars, and also I just didn't think they were that well written. Then comes along this book, and it does exactly what it needs to do. It furthers Vernestra Rowe and Imri Kantaros' story. It tells a standalone story in and of itself. It has bigger themes and a bigger cast and more complexity than any of the other Star Wars books have up until this point, and it just is it's a delightful read, and it wraps everything up well, and it shows that they should have just given Justina all 3 middle grade books and let her just write a through-line story, kind of like Kevin Anderson and Rebecca Mesta did with the Young Jedi Knights. Instead, she only got 2 books, but this book, towards the beginning of the year was when I read it, it was a superb read. My next book is an adult novel for Star Wars, and that was The Princess and the Scoundrel. I'm one of those people that even though David Farland is one of my favorite fantasy authors ever, he wrote my second favorite fantasy series, The Rune Lords, he's amazing, his books are amazing. Didn't love Courtship of Princess Leia. That being said, I was interested to see how Beth Revis would do with the Princess and the Scoundrel, which is telling a similar theme. It's not covering the exact same bases as Courtship of Princess Leia, but it covers similar themes. And I thought this book was an utter delight. It was perfectly executed. The way it brought in different elements of Star Wars, different characters, different Easter eggs. I thought it was just so well done. And it really told the Han and Leia romance that I wanted and that I think Star Wars needed. It told the correct romance for them. I think that Courtship of Princess Leia is not the correct romance for them. This book is. So I loved reading this book. But my winner Star Wars book of the year is going to surprise no one. It's going to surprise absolutely no one, and that is going to be Brotherhood by Mike Chen. Talked about this a lot on the channel. It is one of my best video counts for one of my reviews. This is a book that took everyone by storm mid-year. Everyone was shocked by it. Everyone was like, you got to get a copy. You got to read this book. And it was like, the prequels are amazing. And this book is the first book in a while to recognize how amazing the prequels were. We've had other prequel-ish novels. Master and Apprentice is still my favorite Star Wars canon novel, but it dealt more with Episode 1. And you had Dark Disciple, which was more of a Clone Wars book, and you had some post Revenge of the Sith books that were kind of tied into that. We didn't have any Clone War or Attack of the Clones era books. It's a book that takes place right after Attack of the Clones, right before the Clone Wars. And this book did it. It did it beautifully. It felt like the perfect prequel novel, the perfect novel to attach to Attack of the Clones. Everything about this book was fantastic. So I put this as one of the best Star Wars novels, particularly one of the best canon novels. So that is my list of the best books I read this year. I will have, my best characters and best authors, new authors, and best villains and best themes, all that stuff. All my other best of videos will come out later. But for right now, this is my best books in the different genres video. And if you've read any of these books, let me know. Did you like these books? Did you not like these books? Are there books that I included in I've read these and just these did not make the list that you think should have made my list? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. But until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.